Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Once again, back on the 6-liter van. Today we are going to be trying to get this transmission and this engine out. And being that this is a van, it is different than your pickup. So there's a couple little things that you can see on the outside that are different. However, once you get down to it, there's a lot different with a van and a pickup. So basically, your oil filter location's different. Your oil lines are different. Your bed plate's different. Your oil pan's different. You have a different wiring harness. You have multiple different things on the van chassis, 6-liter. I've dealt with guys that have bought a van engine and they're like, hey, you literally have to change everything. And we would buy the van parts that they wouldn't use because we have a 6-liter van and they were all in good condition. So that's how we ended up with the oil pan that I showed you in an earlier video of this. So I wanted to kind of go over what you have to do to get one of these engines and transmissions out. Obviously, this is easier to do because there's obviously no body. But if you're working on a 6-liter, generally your body's going to be off anyway. So we're going to go over some things here and kind of show you what you got to do to get this transmission out. Now, I don't know what Ford was thinking whenever they gave you the access to the torque converter nuts, but whoever thought that was a great idea really needs to have their head checked, because getting the torque converter nuts out of the torque converter in this is kind of a bear. It's just tedious and not much room. It's very stupid. Not really sure why they designed it that way whenever the 7.3 was so much easier with the whole very big inspection cover on the bottom that you could remove and see the whole bottom of the transmission. I don't know if they were looking at it from a structural point of view, but there's other ways to make things structural than close everything off. So I'm going to show you that and show you what you kind of have to do to get this thing out without breaking anything. And like I said, we're basically just taking the transmission completely out because we want the engine out, and there's nothing for us to support the transmission other than running a strap across. And realistically, it sucks to try to put an engine on a transmission rather than putting a transmission on an engine. So it's got to come apart anyway. There's 2 nuts that hold the mount to the cross member, and the lines are kind of in the way anyway, so they have to come off. So it's just easier, just take the transmission off, set it on a cart, which we have here, and just get it out of the way completely. So I'm going to show you a couple things here on what we did. Now, I've done this stuff already. I didn't video it because it took me literally all day to get some of this stuff off, just because it's so intertwined and in a mess and hard to get to and hard to see. So now that it's all done, I can show you what I did to get everything done and describe it to you. So first we have our transmission lines here. Now, this is the forward side of the vehicle here. So these would be up like this. And we have the rear side here that goes to the transmission. Now, there is a bell housing bolt that holds this line here. And there is a stud on the side of the block that would hold this side here. So this is mounted to the block and also to the bell housing and sits in here like this. Now, to get this off, you have to remove this stud. Actually, you have to remove this off the stud, but when you go to take the nut off, the stud will probably come with it. So when you go to take this off, try to hold the stud. It would be a 4mm, if I'm not mistaken, on the stud, and then the nut is 8mm. So it's either 8 or 10. But you want to try to get the stud to stay in the block, and then you remove the bell housing bolt for this, and that'll let you slide this out underneath in the back and everything like that, and it'll come out from underneath. So this is in the way, realistically, for getting everything off easily. You can work around it. I just chose not to, and we have all of our holes plugged there, except for this one up here. I need to put a little bit of a plug. I need to put a plug on that to keep everything out of it. But we also have the holes plugged on the transmission. So the lines are kind of in the way for us here, so I just took them out completely. It really wasn't hard to do. Just makes life easier. Plus, we're probably going to end up putting the body back on the frame at some point and sending it off to have the body repaired without the engine and transmission. So the less that's dangling and hanging and has a possibility of getting dirt or debris in, the better. So we got the torque converter nuts off. Now these are a locking type nut. I inspected these. They look to be pretty good still. If they come off too easily, I would suggest replacing them. They are a 14 millimeter. Now, to get these nuts off of here, you need to remove these bell housing bolts, okay? So what you need to do is you actually need to back them out about a half an inch. Now, you can see we have this one loose. I have these tightened back up at the top here because technically that's still holding the back of the engine up. But you have to loosen all the bell housing bolts about a half an inch out. You want to leave them in. You don't want to take them all the way out because what you have to do is you have to actually slide this transmission back. And the reason that you have to slide this transmission back is because you can't get a socket between the torque converter and the oil pan. So I'm going to show you that here and show you why that needs to be slid back, and then also show you what I used to get something in there that made my life a little bit easier. So to give you an idea of where we're working here, we have our oil filter down here because we are working on a van. And we have our oil pan here, which is dented. And then we have the bell housing for the transmission. Now, the hole to access all of your torque converter nuts is right there. Now you can see that there's not a whole lot of room there. So I'm going to demonstrate for you what I ran into with this. So you can see that there's a hole here, and that hole is, kind of deep. So we say, okay, well, let's try a deep well socket, okay? Well, first of all, getting this deep well socket in here is a pain because, you got to use two hands, okay? So we're touching the flex plate here. You can see that our socket is touching the oil pan. So that doesn't work. Say, okay, well, maybe I'll try a swivel. Okay. Same thing. It's too long and you can't get the angle you need. So if you use a shallow socket, you actually can't even get it. You can't get it in to where, and I'm not showing you the shallow socket because I don't want to drop it in here. It'll go in, but it doesn't stick out far enough to get it out of the bell housing. So I used a mid-length socket. Now the mid-length socket works very well. So I got to be careful because I don't want to drop it either. But you can't get a ratchet on it and get the nut off because you have to be able to back the nut off. So your mid-length socket's actually just about the right length, but you can't get it off because of the oil pan. So that's why you have to actually take a pry bar, and what you do is you pry the transmission back away from the engine, and what that'll let you do is get your ratchet up in here. So I'm going to show you what I had to do this. And you can see that these bolts on the bottom of the bell housing are backed out. Now, they're not even backed out a half an inch. They might be backed out 3/8, but that's all we really needed. And to get this to slide back enough to get our socket and our ratchet in here to get the nuts off of the flex plate. So I'm going to loosen these bolts up for you, and I'm going to show you how far we have to move this back and why we have to move this back, and show you the socket and the ratchet I used to get these out. So you see the engine fell there. Now I left that purposely to show you that you really should support the back of the engine. Now I didn't take all the bolts out. I loosened them up about the same as what's on the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jack this oil pan up a little bit. And the reason we did that is because we don't want to have any pressure or too much pressure on any of these bolts that we had taken out. And we don't want to put any unusual pressure on the snout of the torque converter or the pump or anything. So basically what you do is you put your bar in like this and you pry this back, okay? Now, sometimes it'll stay, but I have a little bit too much pressure on the engine here. So you pry this back, and what that'll let you do is that'll let you get your ratchet up in here like this and take these nuts off of here. Now, you can see that we have a little bit more room here, and if you pry out on the transmission, that gives you even more room. So I used a mid-length socket and a compact 3/8 ratchet. Now this is a smaller head. It is a quarter drive sized head with a 3/8 square bit on it. So I used this for in here and it worked very well. So that's what we ended up doing to get these torque converter nuts off. Now there is a rubber plug that covers this hole, which obviously is not there, but this is the best way I found to do this. I don't know if there's a special tool for this, but this worked very well. So up on top here, we put the bell housing back together here because we took the jack out and everything. We're going to take this out a little bit later, but I want to continue going over what's different here. So we have these oil lines. Now these run down to the oil filter, which is down here. They all run all the way up to the housing here, which this is our secondary fuel filter housing. And you'll notice that it doesn't have the married two pieces here. So your fuel filter is up here, but your oil filter is not. It's down below on the van. So we have a, I don't know if this housing is different or if it's just manufactured differently or what they did. But this is the van setup up here. We obviously still have all of our stuff up here, your oil coolers and high pressure oil pump and everything like that. So the back pressure sensor is over here. And on this one, the ICP is over here on the valve cover. But that's the main difference here that you can really see. We have the glow plug module here. The FICM is not on the valve cover, but there's a little bit different between these van engines and the truck engines. So I just kind of wanted to show you the differences here and show you what we're running into with this as well. So we do have the IPR kit, which I mentioned in a different video. So that will be going on here, and we'll be getting rid of the oil cooler in the valley. So that's going to be a huge help if we have oil cooler issues. What's nice about it too is it also adds a coolant filter. So we'll be doing that as well. But we do have to take these oil lines off, and we're going to be taking the fuel lines off down here, getting those disconnected, draining all of the oil out of this engine, and getting all that dry, because we're going to be holding up the oil pan with the jack, and we're going to be removing the transmission. We're also going to be removing the rear plate, and we're going to be inspecting what's going on in here. I also need to inspect the high pressure oil pump and see if we need to update anything in here. So we have a lot of stuff to take off before we actually remove this engine, because we have to get it prepared to put on the stand, which is over here. So we're not going to be using a side mount stand on this. So I want to make sure that I have good access to these branch tubes, since we're going to be changing the lifter. The lifter's in the back here. So that's what we're going to be doing next, is we're going to be taking all this stuff off of here. I'm going to try and get these oil lines off of here now and see what we can manage to do with trying to strip this down a little bit more. One thing we did also do was obviously the drive shaft is removed, which you can see there. So coming around the front here, we did take some more stuff off. We removed the rest of the cooling hoses. So there was a heater hose back here, and it ran up and across and everything and over to here. This one's going to stay for right now. We have an inlet here, so we just have to remove it from this the upper intake here, and I have a new O-ring for down here, so we'll take this off a little bit later. But down here, we have the power steering pump. Now, we took this pump, we were going to take it off, but to get this off in the chassis is kind of a bear, because you have to pull the pulley off to get to anything easily. You have a line here, which I do believe is the feed for the power steering box, which comes over to here. Now, this feed line is in the way of a mounting bolt. So we have a feed here and the mounting bolt is right behind it here. So I'm just going to pull this off as a unit. Once we pull the engine out, it'll be much easier to do that because there's not a whole lot of room to get a wrench in here to get this fitting off. I don't feel like pulling the pulley off to do it. So it's just a little bit easier on the inside of the pump to just leave it. So we'll just do that once we get the engine out and hanging. We'll go ahead and pull this power steering pump off. And the reason we have the lines off over here is because I didn't want to do this line in the van chassis here, but we also have a new steering box for this van. So what we did was we ended up buying a redhead steering box, and that will go in this van. So we need to get this changed out so we can get our core sent back to them. So we have a lot of stuff off the front here. And once it's hanging, like I said, we'll remove the power steering pump and the AC compressor, and that'll get the majority off the bottom. And then we can go ahead and start tearing off some more stuff on the top here. Now, they make engine lifting brackets for these things. They bolt down into the valley here, but thankfully there's 2 hooks on here for lifting, and we're going to try to use those to get this in and out. So hopefully this will go smoothly. But we have a lot of stuff to take off yet still here, so I wanted to go ahead and show you what we had already removed. A lot of it took some time, just there's a lot of stuff to take off. So you have to take this pulley off to get to this bracket, to get to the heater hose port, which is down here. You can see the clear white plug on here. So you got to move things to get to things and move this to get to that. So there's a lot of screwing around. But in the process, I did find out that there's a frame hole in the frame here, and you can slide the stud for the ABS block into that. So don't know if that was pre-engineered, but it holds the master cylinder very nicely. So I was super happy about that. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and get this oil drained out of here and get these oil tubes off and see how much of a mess we're going to make and get these fuel lines off and see what we can come up with. So under the van, showed you the oil filter earlier. So there is a plug on the bottom of this. So you can see that we can drain the oil filter canister out of there. So we have a nice little plug here, and this is a 6mm. Quarter almost fits. I don't know if somebody's used the wrong size for a long time, because obviously it's had the oil changed many times before we had it. But the 6 works. It's not supposed to be very tight anyway, so realistically it should be fine. So you can see it's got an O-ring on it here. So we'll set this off to the side. That takes a while to drain because of the design there. You can try to crack a fitting somewhere if you wanted to leak more, but it doesn't really help. So we'll go over here on our dented oil pan and get the oil draining out of here. So we're going to let this drain for a while. Once this is done draining, we'll put our plugs back in, and then we'll continue up on top. So our oil is almost done draining here, but I wanted to get these fuel lines disconnected so these can drain out also. We'll probably end up cracking the fuel filter cap up top there to get all the fuel out of it. But we're going to go ahead and get these disconnected. So we've already gotten the clips out. And one thing I can tell you is you should probably spray inside these with brake cleaner. And the reason you do that is because a lot of grime tends to build up in there, and it can cause you problems getting the tools inserted and then also getting the clips to move. So we got our fuel lines disconnected here, and if we have any residual up there, we're going to go ahead and crack that filter at the top and see if we can get some backflow here. Want to try to get as much fuel out of there as we can so we don't have to deal with it later. So you can see as soon as we cracked that fuel filter, we had some fuel come out of there. So we just want to make sure we get all the fuel out of here so we're not dealing with it later. That's basically the objective to this. So we'll leave that fuel filter loose, and hopefully that'll just drain out over some time here, and we'll let that sit for a little bit, and we'll go ahead and start working on everything else. So one other thing we need to do is we need to get this starter unhooked. Now, the wiring for the starter stays with the frame. It's this harness that runs back and forth here. So it's got a metal bracket that holds it here against the starter, and it also has the obviously 2 terminals here to connect the starter to the wiring. So we have our main power and then our relay or signal wire to trigger the starter to engage. So we need to take these 2 things off, and it's a very tight little narrow space here. However, you can get in here with a battery ratchet, or you can go up from the bottom. So we're just going to disconnect all of this. And the reason we're doing this is because I'm going to pull the whole harness off the engine before we remove it. I want to make sure that we don't damage the harness in picking up the engine. So this little bit of work we're going to do here will let us get this whole harness completely out of the way. So there's a lot of screwing around to get this out the way I want to take it out. I'm very methodical in trying to do these. It might take longer, but I have less risk of damage, and I can make sure that we're not trying to struggle with chains or trying to get it on the stand and worry about damaging a harness or moving it out of the way. Because like I said, these van harnesses are very unique. So this being an 08, it's a 1-year only harness, I do believe. So don't want to mess up the harness if I don't have to. So we're going to go ahead and get this starter disconnected. And when we go to, and if we can, we'll pull it off of here as well and get it out of the way completely. It'll make some less weight here for the engine to take, and it'll be one less thing we have to do later. So this wire here is a power wire up to the top of the engine here. So that's also why we need to take this off. We have these wires here disconnected. We're going to go ahead and remove this metal bracket. So you can see we have the harness completely loose here. And getting this starter out is kind of a pain in the butt. I've actually changed this starter before. So I think what we're going to do is just take the starter off. After we get the engine up, it'll just be much easier to do. So got this wiring done. We're going to work on the rest of the wiring now. So I had said that we were going to take this wiring off. Well, I started looking around a little bit closer here, and this little wiring harness here, and I can't even really get my hand on it because it goes down behind the compressor. It's way down in there somewhere. So I can barely see it through here. Let's see if I can get you to see it. So you can see the harness barely here. So that is that same harness. And that's where we're looking. So there's the plug there. And that is down through that hole right here. So I can't even get my hand on that plug. So with that being said, we're going to be leaving this harness on this engine to come out, because getting that plug back there is not going to be fun. I don't feel like struggling with it. So we can go ahead and get these oil pipes off of here and see what else we can get off of here to make this engine a little bit lighter to come out. So some of this harness we can actually remove. So this harness here is going to be kind of in the way to get these oil tubes out of here. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect as much of this harness as possible. Now we've already got the glow plug harness disconnected, but we need to get the injectors unclipped here, and that would give me enough room to lay this harness back. So we're going to do that so that we can see what we're working with here, and then we'll see what else we can get removed off the top of this valley before we go ahead and pull this engine out to reduce any of the weight that's on this engine. So we have little clips here. Just pull the clip out, do not lose it, and these should gently unplug, and then go ahead and stick your clip back on there. One thing I do want to mention is you don't want to be moving this harness around a whole awful lot, because these wires have kind of a memory. You don't want to bust them up. We've got this harness loosened up on this side here. We have a sensor here for the pump, so that'll let us kind of pick this harness up and get a little bit better access to our tubes here. So this harness is all overlaid here, and we do have, it looks like, two branches of the harness here. So you could realistically flip this harness up out, but it's not conducive because we can't get the rest of the harness out with the AC compressor in the way. So we also need to remove some of the harness down through here. So now we have access to these tubes, and it looks like this turbo mounting bracket is going to kind of be in the way to get these tubes out nicely. We'll see if we can get that off of there. But looks like it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. Looks like we have a couple bolts here. But we'll try and get this turbo mounting bracket out of here, and hopefully that'll give us a little bit more room to get these pipes out of here to get the the oil filter, external oil filter pipes removed here. And we'll see what we can get done here. So to get the turbo mount off, we have a couple bolts here. There, now you can see. So we have these two down here. And there should be one more over here. There it is. There's the other one. So we have these bolts loosened up here. We also have our oil pipe here. This is our return. So this actually kind of wiggles out of the way here, and we can hopefully pull this kind of out of here, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So either way, we got this loose, so that'll give us a little bit more freedom to get these pipes out of here. And we have a bolt here that's a retainer. You can kind of see there by my thumb. So that will retain these tubes to the housing here. So now you can see that bolt a little bit better here. So we're going to release this bolt and release these pipes from the housing here and probably make a mess. So we're looking at the back of the engine here now. We have three 10 millimeter bolts holding this oil filter assembly on. There is a retainer for the bolt for the top of these tubes, but what we're going to do is we're going to leave these attached for now, and there's a 13 millimeter bolt that holds the bracket to the engine here. So we should be able to release this bolt and release these three bolts down here and pull this whole oil assembly off. So you can see we have that loose there. Now we just have that one bolt. So everything should be free here, and we'll be able to pull these pipes out of the upper housing there. And let's see if we can get you to see a little bit more up here. So we have our whole unit here. You can see we have the O-rings on these tubes here. Now I'm going to pull this retainer out of here and put it back up on the housing so we don't have to worry about losing it for some reason. So I'll bolt that back on there in a second. But now we have all of that out of the way. Should be able to pull this guy out of here, hopefully. So now we got our turbo mount out, and we have a little bit better access to everything up here now. So as you can see, working on the vans is kind of a pain in the butt. There's a lot of extra steps for everything here. So we're just going to go ahead and put some of these bolts back where they're supposed to be. So here we have our normal 6-liter valley. So we have our IPR back here and our high pressure oil pump. We have our whole assembly up here, which I do believe the oil cooler is under here. And we're going to go ahead and start getting this transmission out. So we have a lot of the stuff removed that doesn't need to be here, that's going to be in the way. So we have, the oil lines that were here, they were going to be in the way. We'll probably remove this heat shield as well, and we can get this transmission out of the way, get our oil pan down there out of the way, and get this thing ready to pull out of here. So now that everything's been disconnected and removed, we kind of have a little bit better view as to what we're doing back here, because we're going to be needing to pull the rear plate off of this so that we can get access to the branch tube that's behind here. So now that we've gotten everything out of the way, we're going to go ahead and put our jack back under the oil pan down here, and then we're going to start by removing the transmission and setting it on the cart that we showed you earlier. Then at that point, the engine will be supported by the jack. We don't have to worry about anything flipping and flopping, and we can start getting this engine out of here. So you see the engine fell a little bit there. So we're going to go ahead and jack it up some more and get some of the tension off of that. So we've got all the top ones out. I think there's another one on the bottom over there, and then we have the two on the very, very bottom. So this transmission spread here a little bit, and that's going to cause us a problem. So put it back together there because we don't want it to slip off of the collars there and actually fall down. We don't need that. So we've got all of our bolts out here, and our short ones obviously go on the bottom. All the other ones are the same, except this one's got a little bit of a stud on it, and then a couple little brackets that go here and there. So the transmission is technically completely disconnected, and we're going to go ahead and get a strap around this so that we can get this transmission picked up out of here and set down. Okay, so we've got this all hooked up here. The key point is you want to make sure that you're not pulling too much on the pan. Now we have this saddled pretty nicely, and we made sure we're not pinching any of the harnesses here. This one's still good over here. So you want to make sure that you're not pinching any wires. So this guy's moving a little bit here, but that's okay. We're not going to be pinching that in there. So now we can go ahead and pick this up a little bit. If we have to, we can kind of rotate the whole assembly to get it to come out a little bit easier. So we have this here, and what we can do now is we're going to jack the engine up a little bit to help kind of alleviate that little bit of tension there, which isn't that much at all. And we'll go ahead and make sure we don't lose our torque converter and pull this whole assembly out. So now we have these separated here. We can go ahead and pull this out of here. We're going to monitor, make sure we don't lose our torque converter. So now we're up high enough here we can get it out from over the frame, and we'll get it set on our cart. So here we are in my favorite seat of the house. This is the easiest way to work on the back of these engines. 7.3, 6 liters, pretty much anything. Have a seat on the transmission cross member and go to town. So we're going to try to get this flex plate off of here, get this heat shield off of here, and then work on getting this rear plate off. The starter's attached to the plate. Hopefully that doesn't give us any issues. I'm just going to try to leave the starter on it. So we're going to start with getting this flex plate off of here and see what's behind it as far as retaining the plate on there. So we have our plate here. We have a couple, looks like 10 millimeter bolts, but first I need to take this shield off of here and make sure there's nothing behind it. So now we can see the whole plate here, and the high pressure oil pump cover here is currently attached to this plate as well. So it's got a seal here, and I want to pull the top of this high pressure oil cover off, and then I can start pulling this plate off, but there's a bunch of garbage up here. So I'm going to sweep this all up and try to clean this up, and then we can take this high pressure oil pump cover off of here. We'll have to unplug the IPR here and possibly remove it to get this cover up off the pump here. So we'll be doing that next. So we got all the loose debris swept up here. So we can go ahead and get our IPR unplugged here, set the harness off to the side. Now we can take this IPR out. So this is a little bit bigger than 1.25 inches. But it shouldn't be super tight. So now that we have that out of there, we want to be very careful we don't get anything in there. So I put a little bit of a plug in there, and now we can go ahead and take this top cover off of here. So we're going to clean this up a little bit more. Make sure that we got a good clean surface here. We don't want any of this crap falling down in here. So you can see we got our little wedge stuck in here. And what that'll let us do is try to break that seal between this cover and the rest of the block. So you can see I didn't use any hammers there. I want to be very careful that we don't screw up these mating surfaces. Then we have our gasket here. So the reason I did this first is because I don't want to damage the surface here. And then we can go ahead and get this rear plate off. So once we get this rear plate off of here, I'm going to put that cover back on just to protect any internals here. We don't want any dust or dirt getting down in there, just because I don't know how far we're going to get with this engine. So we got all those bolts out down here. Then we have our two on the top. So you can see it wiggles a little bit there. So it looks like the starter might be fighting us here a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get this starter out of here. I can tell you changing the starter on this thing sucks. So we got the starter out of the way, which I think was holding us here. So let's see if this is going to come off now. So you can see it's just fighting me the whole way here. And it's probably the seal on the center here. But I don't want to be prying on this too much because this is just aluminum. So you can see we have our rear plate off of here, and we were being held in by this seal here, so that was the whole issue. So I'm gonna have to see if this is a replaceable item for me here, how to get that off of there. I haven't looked into that yet, but at this point, I think we're ready to pull the engine out. But we're gonna look into this seal and see what we can figure out about changing that out. You can see our back of our engine here. We have a branch tube, our cam. So now we can go ahead and actually mount this to our engine stand. Now that we can see our branch tube that's going to have to come out this side, we can go ahead and make sure we mount low enough on the back of the engine so that we can get this branch tube out to change our lifters. So you can see we got our main seal off of here, and you can see that we have definitely some wear on the plate here. So to get this plate off the back of the crank, it's just basically you just pull it off of there with, say, a 2-jaw puller or a 3-jaw puller, and it's very simple, and then your seal comes off with it. So this is how it would come off, just like this. So now that we have all the stuff back off of the back of the engine here, you can see we have our cover plate back on here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get this thing prepped to lift out of here, and that way we can set it on our stand, and we have nothing in the back here because we're not pulling the cam out of here. We just want to make sure we can get to this branch tube, and at that point we can start the disassembly process. All right, guys, so we're going to be getting this engine out of here, and normally we would be using the engine hoist over here, but because of incompatibilities, now that I've discussed this on other videos of mine, where the engine stand does not fit in between the base of the engine hoist. So in that scenario, I don't want to be dealing with the legs hitting each other. So I've never mounted one of these onto a stand before. I don't want to be dealing with how that's going to fit together. So instead, we're going to be using the excavator. And the only reason we're using the excavator is because of the legs on the bases of the stand and the hoist, which I'm not crazy about. And I want to make sure that I don't screw up mounting this thing, because the back of these engines are a little bit different, not so much like a 7.3. So we're going to be using the excavator, and we have it set up over here with the lifting device, and we have some shackles in here. These are all rated heavy enough to be picking this engine up, so we are good with this. So this is what we're going to be using to pick the engine up. So you can see here that we are close to where we need to be, but I need to pick this thing back up and rock this engine back to get this mounted up nice. So we've got this all tightened down. We're going to go ahead and let this down and see how much this engine stand likes this 6-liter. So not too bad. So let's get this unhooked here and get this engine lift out of the way. So So we got the 6 liter on the stand here. So now we can finally get into tearing this thing apart. And that went about as good as I was expecting. It's a little difficult to do by yourself, especially when you're trying to line everything up here. And you can see we can still get this branch tube out. Hopefully that won't give us any issues here. And we should be quite all right. So we used a set of 7-3 main bolts up here, and we used a bell housing bolt down here and down here as well. So we've got it good and tight on the stand here, so we shouldn't have any issues, moving this thing around. So hopefully we can get this thing torn apart and get it all fixed up and get this thing back in the van. We got a little bit of a mess to clean up here. We had a bunch of coolant come out, so shouldn't be too bad. So hopefully the next video you see on this, we'll be tearing this thing apart some more, and hopefully doing something productive with it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you're enjoying this series on the 08 van, and hopefully we can keep making some content for you. So thanks for watching again. Really appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.